Hi everyone, this is Ahmed, and today I'm going to talk to you about Kubernetes APIs. This will be a short video talking about Kubernetes reverse proxy, some API samples, the use of Kubernetes APIs, and turning off the reverse proxy. So I'll be using this documentation that I made. I'll provide this documentation in the description box below. You can use it and try to play with the APIs that Kubernetes has. So if you want to read about the Kubernetes APIs, you should check out this link that I provided in the document. This will give you all the APIs that Kubernetes has and the documentation for all Kubernetes. So let's start first by using Kubernetes APIs. To start using the Kubernetes APIs, you need to run reverse proxy so that you can call and it will return you some information about the Kubernetes cluster. So you're just gonna copy this line and paste it on your Kubernetes master, and you have to put the IP address of the master. So now the reverse proxy is running. So all you have to do is go back to the documentation and see the list that I provided. This is just samples. You can use them or not use them. The first one would be just checking if the reverse proxy is working or not. So if you go to Postman, I'll provide this Postman collection in the description box below, and you're just gonna click on like first API, which is the first one, and just change the IP address to your IP address and hit send. And I got back that yes, I have an API. It's version 1 and it's running on this cluster. So let's move on. The second one would be like to show all the namespaces that you have in the cluster. So let's run the second one. So the namespaces that I have right now, it's just default kube public and kube system. So let's try that out. Let's add like new namespaces in the cluster. So create namespace. Let's call it testing 1 2 3, and now it's created. Let's call the API and check that out. As you can see right here, we have the namespace. It's created. So now let's delete it. So right now it's deleted. If you go back to the API and click on send, you shouldn't get the one we just deleted. So now let's move on to the third one, which is the third API, which is get all the pods in the cluster, get their IP address, names, where does it exist in the system, etc. So let's call that and try it out. Just change the IP address to your IP address. Click on send. Yes, I got all the pods in the system. So if we, for example, just check out right here, the kube API server. So it exists on the namespace kube system right here. The name of the pod is the kube API server, and then the name of the node that exists on. It gives you all the information related to that container, and right here under status you will get that it's running, the phase that it's in, it's running, and you will get the IP address for it, the pod IP address, and so on for the other pods. Let's move on to the fourth API call that I have, which is services, to show all the services in the Kubernetes cluster. So click on services, change the IP address, click on send. I got the services. I only have one, I only have the default ones. So Kubernetes, it relies on the namespace default, and there's a other one called kubedns. This one is called by every pod when it's created to give it an IP address. So this one lies on the namespace kube system and so on. So to make sure that I have the APIs working, let's create another service in the cluster and check it out from the APIs. So I'm just gonna call kube control create service type node port, and give it the name testing 123, and the TCP, if the protocol is TCP, give it like a port number, and let's say expose it on 8080. So right now I have a service, I have the service created. If I called kube controller get services, I should get it right here. So let's move on and check it out from the API. If you click on send, I can see right here it's in the namespace default testing 123. We just created that. So now let's delete it. So it's now, because I deleted it, now it's gone. When I call get services, let's call the API and check that out. Yeah, it's not there. So now let's move on to the fifth API. This API will call the pods when in a particular namespace that you choose. So you only need to change this path right here to put the namespace that you want to get the pods from. So let's create containers in the default namespace and try to call them from the API. So I'm just gonna say run the deployment nginx. I call it nginx from the image nginx, and I want 4 replicas. That means 4 containers that exist in the cluster. It's created. Let's check that out. Get pods. So now it's all running in the cluster. So let's try call them from the APIs. So we use this one and change this to default, since they all in the default one. Oh, you need to change the IP address. So now I got the nginx. This is the first container. So I should have 4 containers that exist in the cluster. So I have all the information about them. So 7, the one that end up with S2 is the first one that popped out. This is the name of the pod. This is the namespace where does it exist, and if you want to call that exact pod, you're just gonna add the name of the pod after pod, so just slash and the name of the pod. So you're just gonna call this particular pod. More information, if you go down here to containers, you'll have the container name, which is nginx, the image also nginx. If you go down to status, you can check that it's the phase that it's running, or pending, or creating containers. But right now it's running and ready. And if you go down even more, you will find the pod IP address and the node that exists on. So since now my master is 195, but this is 196 because I have master and a worker, and 196 is my worker IP address. So now let's delete these pods and check out from the APIs if it got deleted or not. So delete deployment, called it nginx. Now it's deleted. Let's get the pods. No service found, so no resources found, sorry. So now let's go to the APIs and call the same API, and it will return nothing because there is no containers in the default namespace. So now if you want to get like the deployment, which means like give me the containers, the container names, the port number that this is exposed on, how many replicas of this exact deployment that we have, how many containers per pod. You're just gonna run the last API that I provided. So if you're gonna click on this and default namespace, change it to your IP address. Let's create the Nginx again to check it out. So right now they are all started creating containers, and now all of them are running. So let's start trying to call the API. So I got the deployment. I have a deployment name which is Nginx. It's in the default namespace, and it has 4 replicas, means 4 containers. And the status of these containers, I have 4 replicas. They are up to date, and they are ready, and they are all available. So to get this exact output, you're just gonna call from the Kubernetes control, get deployment, and then put in the name of the deployment, which is Nginx. I got the same, 4 available, 4 up to date, and 4 current, and 4 desired. So how can you use these APIs? So if you want to extract information as a JSON file, you can do it by using these APIs. You can also navigate through the APIs to get like pod names, IP addresses, and you can use that for the GUI. Like if you have a GUI, just gonna call the like a REST API calls to the Kubernetes, and Kubernetes will reply with a JSON file and just gonna format it to your GUI. So I'm just gonna give an example on number 2, how can you navigate through the JSON file. So if we go right here, and we called this function that I provided right here, if you're gonna curl it, just gonna get the container name plus the the pod IP address. Just gonna copy it, paste it right here. This is my local machine, by the way. You can do it also from another machine or from your local. It works both ways since we exposed the container. So it's default, and my IP address is 195. So as you can see right here, I have 4 containers that has the same name but different IP addresses. That means they exist in the cluster, but each one is a separate container. So that's the way to sift through it. So all you have to do is install if you're gonna run this, it's gonna ask you to install JQ. Just install it and then run the same command, and it will work for you. So let's get back to the documentation. The last point would be turning off the reverse proxy so that so that no one will get access to this, because like the flag accept --accept hosts will accept all the hosts that will call this. So in an ideal way of doing it, you're just gonna put the IP address of the GUI so that only the GUI can call your APIs, or your local machine, of course. So I'm just gonna call this command right here to give me the PID of the process, and then I'll kill it. So right here I have the call that we made earlier. Just gonna copy the PID and just kill -9 and killed it. So if you go to the APIs, it's not responding. So now, yeah, I have turned off the reverse proxy. So getting back to the points that we started this video with, we've created Kubernetes reverse proxy, gave some API samples, how can you use the Kubernetes APIs, and how to turn it off.